Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to the Islamic Vice podcast. I'm your host Majid, and today I have with me as my co-hosts Brother Rash and Brother JK. Assalamu alaikum, brothers, and welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum salam
Like,
wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having us again. It's been a while.
It has been a while, yeah. I want to do these things regularly, but everyone's busy doing their stuff, so we try to get on, especially with the important topics as such, and the sort of topic that we're going to be discussing today is something which is quite key. But before we get into it, is that everything good with you guys?
Yeah, really.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, I listened to your last one actually that you did with Brother Muttaqi, and I enjoyed quite a few of his angles on that one as well.
MashaAllah,
Yeah,
yes.
especially when talking about Jordan Peterson and stuff like that. So yeah, I thought that was quite interesting. It just highlights, how easy it is for people just to follow celebrities nowadays. We seem to live in that kind of generation, and it's everywhere. So maybe something we can touch on as well. But yeah, no, alhamdulillah, good. And yeah, I enjoyed your last podcast.
No, Jazakallah khair, bro. I think, to be honest with you, with Jordan Peterson, maybe he may come up in today's topic. But there is a link to it. But I think you're right. What Brother Muttaqi was saying, that he had known this guy for a while now,
A lot longer than a lot of people only heard about him more recently, but yeah, he's been around for a while.
and that's the thing. So it's one of those that people who have kind of followed their journey more closely, they can kind of see what's going on. Whilst a lot of us, unfortunately, because there's, as I've mentioned before, there's the onslaught against Islam. If someone who's a non-Muslim says something good, especially someone who is a bit of a personality, online personality and stuff, then we tend to put all our weight behind them. However, we need to learn, because the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam did say that the believer is the one who's not stung from the same hole twice, and we need to stop getting stung.
Yes,
is what I would say. But in regards,
it's quite good getting an American perspective, though, isn't it? Like, because Brother Muttaqi is from America, obviously Jordan Peterson's American, so they might. Obviously, I don't think Brother Muttaqi is like that, but there might be some sort of loyalty because they're kind of from a similar place. But
he's Canadian.
Canadian, I think. Yeah.
Was he Canadian?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought he was American.
Yeah,
Okay,
but to be honest,
not too far, yeah.
to all of us, Canadian American seems like the same thing, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
You know what I mean? But yeah, you're right. So it was good. I mean, for those people who haven't listened to the last episode, check it out. But the Muttaqi spoke about, went over quite a few topics, a bit of a recap of 2022 and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, inshallah, let's get into today's topic. But like I mentioned, Rash, it would be good to do these more regularly, because there is quite a lot to speak about. I mean, we could have spoken today about Prince Ari, and what all the stuff that he's been coming out with from his book about killing Muslims in Afghanistan and that sort of stuff, and there's a lot of other things going on as well. But today's topic has to be focused on the issue of Al-Aqsa and on Palestine, because it's something which we probably didn't speak about in the last couple of months, and a lot's happened since the elections, really. I know that today maybe we might focus more on the issue to do with Ben-Gvir, and the way he stormed Al-Aqsa Masjid. But the reality is that we know Netanyahu's back, and we know what they say is that this is the most extreme government in the history of Israel. There's people like Ben-Gvir, there's people like Smotrich, Bezalel Smotrich, and these people are actually disciples of Meir Kahane, who's meant to be some sort of like extremist who was actually banned by the US. His party was banned by the US. But before going on to the issue to do with the storming of Al-Aqsa by Ben-Gvir and what this entails, a quick question I want to ask you guys, because I was thinking about this, right? That there's been a lot of talk about the most extreme government, right? And it somewhat feels like there at some point there was a moderate one in there. Do you know what I mean? And I want to what are your thoughts on that? Because to me, if I'm going to tell you myself, to me, there's no such thing as a moderate or an extreme Zionist, right? They want the same. Some may be more outspoken than others, but the reality is that their objectives are the same. The hatred for Islam, for the Palestinians, for Arabs, for Muslims in general, is the same. So I mean, just throwing out there before we get into the topic, I mean, what you make of this extreme and moderate left-leaning type of governments? To me, they're all the same.
Yeah, I think there is an argument for them being slightly different. I agree with you in that, their end goal is the same. The Zionist project is the same, and the Zionist project's about creating a greater Israel, getting rid of all the Muslims. Even that statement that I think Netanyahu put on his Twitter about what Israel will encompass, and he's supposed to be more of a slightly more, like you said, more centrist, modernist, rather than a right wing. So you're right, their end goal is the same, and that's what they're trying to achieve. I think where I'd slightly say there is an element of left leaning and right leaning is the reason that this particular formation of the party this time is more right leaning is, as we see everywhere in like Europe as well, and in many parts of the world, there is a more of a right-leaning type populism is growing. So you do get people who are more, pushing these nationalist, populist parties. And what those ones kind of want is, it's a clash. There's a clash going on within their civilization, not just amongst Muslims. So it just so happens that, the ultra-Orthodox Jews there do want more now. They've had this period of when, Netanyahu was in charge before, followed by, the coalition. Now they're like, we want more of what you kind of promised us as the Zionist project from the beginning. We want to be able to pray on Temple Mount, as they call it. They want more, basically. And that's where I think there is a bit more of that right-leaning element to it. This is just my opinion. So I think there is that growth of that right-wing way of thinking, no compromise, no tolerance. We want what we want. It's a Zionist project. It's a Jewish project. We want that. And because that has grown amongst the people, that has allowed this Ben-Gvir guy to gain more prominence, but also on top of that allowed the party to formulate themselves in that way. And that's why they've ended up with this the most right-wing group of people in charge of Israel, that there's ever been. So I think there is an element to it, although I do also agree that the end goal is pretty much the same.
Yeah, sure. JK, anything on that?
Yeah, no, I agree definitely with what you're saying. That it does, in the grand scheme of things, does it really change anything? And probably not, actually. But I think there's a couple of ways to look at it. One is that if we're thinking about persecution, the reality is the right-wing government probably would be more. There'd be more oppression probably under them, in the sense that they're a bit more blatant, a bit more. They're going to be storming more. They're going to be doing more settlements. So you're going to get this kind of accelerated pace from the right wing. They're not going to be willing to kind of sit down, and their diplomacy really isn't on the radar, especially Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, these kind of people. They're very much religious Zionists, so they believe in, or we'll go into it, they believe in all these like prophecies and stuff like that of the Jews. So I think the difference is that you're going to get them being a bit more aggressive in how they get things across. But as you both said, I think the end goal is very much similar to a left-leaning. Even when you say left-leaning, it's relative, isn't it? But I think one of the key things you'll see is in that population, the younger population of Israel, I think they're looking for some legitimacy. So they don't want this kind of view of them being the barbaric in the way they're treating Palestinians. So they don't. A lot of Jews don't want, or even Israelis, if you want to call it, don't want this kind of gung-ho approach. They prefer the subtle approach, maybe even support the two-state solution to come to a diplomatic solution, because they give more prominence to kind of international recognized statements and things like that. So I think, it's all politics at the end of the day, but as a Muslim and for Islam, very much similar. And now what we should be calling for is not a two-state solution or anything like that. We should be calling for the Islamic solution, which is the whole of Palestine to be liberated. So, yeah, agree. There are differences. There will be, but you're right. In the grand scheme of things, probably not so much.
Yeah, no.
You could even argue, sorry, Matt, just on
No,
your
go for
point, you could argue that it's no different to left and right wing politics anywhere in the world. So what we're seeing nowadays is, like even say take the UK for example, there was even Muslims that were more kind of left towards like Labour and left because they thought, oh, these guys at least, have some sympathy for us. But what we're learning more and more is just because the left might have sympathy towards minorities and stuff, the left are the ones that are pushing the decadence ideas of liberalism, of LGBT, and all of these kind of things into our. So it's like a softly approach, but the end goal actually, it ends up either being the same, possibly even worse sometimes, because the left wing approach, sometimes you can miss it. It's like the wolf in sheep's clothing, isn't it? It's the leftly, you think, oh, they're on our side, and suddenly they stab you in the back. Whereas the right wing come along and they tell you up front that we're your enemy. So yes, you still know they're your enemy, but at least it's blatant and obvious and you can fight against it. So I arguably think it's similar in whether it's whether it's Israel or wherever it is in the world. You get this Western modern politics of left and right generally has a certain end goal, and both sides are problematic from an Islamic point of view.
Yeah, no, that's some good points there, guys. Good points. And I agree as well, to be honest with you. And there's loads of stuff that you guys have gone into, which inshallah we'll go into more throughout the actual discussion and stuff. So in regards to the storming then of Masjid Al-Aqsa by Ben-Gvir, obviously this is something which he had promised his voter base, his support base, that if he becomes a minister, this is what he's going to do. But what we've seen though is that when he stormed Masjid Al-Aqsa, there's been kind of like a different approach by the nations of the world, shall I say? Because what we've seen like an international outcry or international concern over the storming by Ben-Gvir, right? And we've seen like in the past where the illegal state of Israel has done all sorts, right? Look what they did in Jenin. Look, when they, for example, maybe it was one of the first kind of incidents where they blocked the media from going in and medical assistance and all this sort of stuff. And this happened. And we see what they've been doing. It's been ongoing, and it's there for everyone to see, right? But what we saw is recently, I mean, for example, the US ambassador to the UN, basically what he said was that the US firmly supports the preservation of the historical status quo with respect to the holy sites in Jerusalem. This was Robert Wood, right? UN ambassador to UN. He also said that the US is concerned by any unilateral acts that exacerbate tensions or undermine the viability of a two-state solution. The US firmly supports the preservation of the historical status quo with respect to the holy sites in Jerusalem, especially on the Haram Al-Sharif. In this spirit, we oppose any and all unilateral actions that depart from the historical status quo that are unacceptable. We also saw Britain, Barbara Woodward, the UK ambassador to the UN. She said that the UK is committed to working with all parties to uphold the status quo in Jerusalem. All parties must avoid actions which inflame tensions, undermine the cause of peace, or unilaterally seek to alter the status quo. She reiterated that the UK's support for a two-state solution based on 1967 lines and Jerusalem as the shared capital as the only way to ensure a lasting peace between the parties. Also, we had a quote by Mohammed Abu Shahab, who is the UAE's ambassador to the UN. He said that the visit constitutes a serious development that moves the region further away from the desired path of peace and contributes to perpetuating the negative trends of the conflict. And we also saw a statement by Saudi Arabia, The ministry expresses the kingdom's regret at the practices of the Israeli occupation authorities that undermine international peace efforts and contradict international norms and principles of respecting religious sanctities. And there were loads of other nations that made similar statements. So I think what I want to kick off on in regards to the first question is the fact that in the past, Israel has done what it wants, and there's not really been too much of an outcry. Why do you think that we're seeing these nations actually, give quite a strong message to the latest actions by Ben-Gvir and by the new government? Are they concerned about the feelings of the Muslims, their sentiments, or are they concerned about the offense that this storming has caused? What do you guys think?
So what I would say is, first and foremost, is it's interesting that the approach by the Muslim countries is the same as the approach by the Americans. That in itself should be an indicator. If you like, sometime you might get a Muslim ruler coming forward with like an Islamic stance, and then which is opposed to the American stance or to a Western stance, then you might look into it a little bit more. When the stance from all of the countries, including the sellout Muslim countries, as well as America, is exactly the same, first things first is you should question that. Because clearly it's not because they care about Muslims, and it's not even because they care about Al-Aqsa. What they care about is the American project of why Israel exists in the region in the first place. And I find it interesting that almost every single Western kind of speech given or comment given all had the word status quo in there. And that's the key word, isn't it? Status quo. And for them, I know what they mean by status quo. They mean that, we want a situation where, at some point we want to be able to still push for internationalization. We want there to still be some opportunity for having a two-state solution. We want a degree of both people being there, and we just want to maintain the conflict and the division that's there. That's what they mean by status quo. They might tart it up a little bit and go, there's an opportunity for peace when the status quo exists, because that's what they're trying to push. But there's not an opportunity for peace, even with the status quo or without the status quo. We know the only opportunity for peace is, and history testifies to it, is when Muslims take over that land and they allow, people of other religions to pray in their relevant in their religious institutes and places. History testifies to it. We've got the proof of that. Others haven't. So I think it's just a matter of them emboldening the fact that they still want to push the idea of there's somehow can be a two-state solution, even though that theory is long gone, be it amongst Jews and people in Israel and Zionists, and possibly, hopefully, even amongst the Muslims.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think when they say status quo, you're absolutely right that is a common word used. They're doing it for their own agenda, but the status quo, essentially what it was something that all the way back in the Ottoman era, to be fair, where Al-Aqsa was given a certain status. And what that meant is the Muslims were allowed to pray there, but non-Muslims and Jews specifically, they were barred, they were banned. It was Sultan Osman, actually, the third, who issued a decree, and he basically said, and this is what's called the status quo, he said that in order to kind of stop infighting between Christians who are looking at from their perspective, the Holy Sepulchre, they call it, and the Jews, obviously the Temple Mount, and for us Al-Aqsa, to have peace between the communities. He said that this would be the decree, that the Jews could only pray up until what they call the wall, Western Wall, Wailing Wall, if you want to call it. And the interesting thing is, by and large, since then, that was all the way in like 1750, since then, the Jewish rabbi, the main chief rabbi of the Jews, they agreed with this. They themselves said, the Jews cannot go here until the arrival of the Messiah and all of this, right? Unless you're pure. But for them, they actually believe that no Jew today is pure to go here. Messiah. This is like the theological reason as to what the status quo is. Obviously, it's kind of chopped and changed throughout the time, but it essentially means that this Al-Aqsa is for the Muslims, right? But what's happened is in more recent years, I want to say recent, I don't mean recent, even during the time of Ariel Sharon, he actually initiated it in his time. He was obviously former Prime Minister of Israel. He made a visit similar to Ben-Gvir to Al-Aqsa, and he basically caused. See, I don't know if you remember. I was a bit younger, I think, but from what I've read, he did this and it did cause uproar. And he was similar.
It caused the second Intifada.
Yeah, Intifada. Yeah, it caused the second Intifada, exactly. So that just tells you how much it means. And he was very similar to Ben-Gvir. He believed in this kind of Jewish Zionism, and he believed in these statements. And they had other, scriptures that claimed, all false, obviously, but they claimed that the Temple Mount is here. They need to destroy Al-Aqsa. This is the more kind of down the line of what they really want to achieve going forward. They want to destroy Al-Aqsa and build the Temple Mount on top of this. So that is the kind of the context of why they're there and what they're trying to push. The question you asked about, are the Muslim leaders really concerned about Muslims?
Well, it wasn't even so much about the Muslim leaders, but also it was about like the
common
US
messaging.
And, you never hear this sort of.
Yeah. I mean, the US obviously not all. We know they've got an agenda for the region. They're not concerned, but likewise, UAE, Egypt, Saudi, all of these nations came out uproar, right? But what I would say to you or anyone listening is that, do these words hold any weight when most of these countries, or a lot of them, have either normalized relations with this entity, right? UAE, Egypt already has normalized relations. Turkey have recently, they're basically normalized relations in the sense of what they're doing now with Israel. Saudi, close to normalization. Obviously, theirs will take a bit longer. So these are the same nations that are now causing uproar. I mean, their actions are greater than their words, right? And their actions are what show that they have already normalized relationship with the criminals. So what do their words mean? Their words are just mere words, right? The other thing to note is that some of these leaders, Sisi, bin Zayed, some others as well, they congratulated Netanyahu on his return. They congratulated him, knowing that, as you said at the start of this podcast, knowing that this is the most far-right government, knowing that what that means, there's going to be more settlements, there's going to be more incursions of Al-Aqsa, there's going to be more stormings, right? Knowing this, they congratulated him. So you tell me, right? How can on one hand they be so happy and congratulate him, normalize relations, economic-wise as well, they've got lots of ties, yet when it comes to their words, it's mere words, really. And all they're doing really is putting pressure on Netanyahu for America, because this doesn't fall in line with America's agenda for that region.
Yeah, and I think that's worth exploring a little bit more, because whilst the messaging is the same, America's message is quite clear in that they don't support this because this goes against what their designs for the region are. Yes, and if America really, really wants to nip it in the bud, obviously they've got the means to do it, in that they're the ones that are funding and providing the aid and providing the military support, selling arms and things to them, so they can take a more heavy-handed approach. But at the same time, the reason why I believe, and again you might differ, the reason why they're not more heavy-handed in preventing it, because remember, they have the UN under their belt. If they want to make changes via the UN, the Geneva Conventions, all of these, international law, we all know that Israel has broken more of them than any other nation. The nuclear can't even say the word proliferation treaty and all of those things. We know that it's Israel are the only ones that don't sign up to these things, that get vetoes, that actually are the ones that continue to break these rules, yet there's never any repercussion. Consequences, exactly. So if America wanted to, it could, but the way I believe it is they want to continue this conflict in a way where they don't want to resolve it, because if they resolve it, then clearly they can't continue to play this card, but they have to keep allowing the Israelis and the Zionists to think there's a chance. There's a chance they can get their own state, their Jewish entity. But truly, America doesn't want that, because that in itself makes it more difficult for the Muslim nations to properly normalize. Outright, if Israel starts kicking out, and it's doing it anyway, it's just doing it in the long game. If Israel outright just starts kicking out all of the Muslims now, completely destroys Gaza, completely takes over Al-Aqsa, if it did that outright, then the populations, even though it shouldn't take that, I'll be honest, already Muslims should be up in arms about the situation. But this is the problem of the fact that, it's a long game and it's always happening. So it's hard to get proper mobilization. But if they went to that extreme, then these countries, even with their puppet rulers, personally, I don't think they'd be able to normalize the way they have, because their population still don't want this. We saw it in the World Cup. We saw people are not happy with these normalizations, yet they've accepted them because their rulers are the ones that have gone ahead and done it. So I think that's why America allows this. The analogy is like your spoiled child, or isn't it? Israel's like the spoiled child of America, and it allows it to go out of hand, but it's kept it on a tight leash. And when it wants to, it will, put its foot down.
Yeah, exactly. And I think just to kind of add to what you're saying, Rush, to put more context to it, is if we look at the usurping entity, the legal state of Israel, in reality, this is it's an outpost it's a base for the West in the heart of the Muslim lands, in the Arab lands.
Remember, we had that other brother on a podcast a long time ago. He gave it there was another name, something like a aircraft carrier in the region or something. It's a really good way he described it. I can't remember now.
Actually, to be honest with you, there's a video where I think Netanyahu.
Yeah. Was it a quote? Okay.
Quote describing it as an aircraft carrier.
Okay, that's where it came from.
For the Americans. So what you can see is that one of the reasons why this entity is there is to stop Muslims from kind of regrouping, rising again, because there's always going to be a thorn in their side, and that's this state, right? And all the effort is going to be consumed by this. So what we can see is that, yes, like you're saying, Americans, to be honest with you, if they stopped, and this is the reality, a lot of people think that the America is a puppet of the state of Israel. That's far-fetched. America is what's supporting, and if they stop supporting this state, then it's not going to be there for too long, right?
Biden himself, the quote came out, didn't it? Like recently, someone fished it out. Biden himself said, if Israel didn't exist, we'd create an Israel, and in the heart of the Muslim lands. How much more blatant do you want it to be?
Exactly. So there is a purpose for them. However, what we're seeing is what's been happening over the last couple of years is the fact that the effort now is to normalize the existence of this state. Okay, because also another thing is as well is that this matter, from their point of view, maybe they're thinking like, look, this is one issue that gets Muslims angry, gets Muslims looking for a permanent solution. Muslims looking to the armies to saying, what if we were under one leadership, one sincere leadership, these people couldn't last here, right? So these issues that are in the Muslim lands, and especially the one of Al-Aqsa, is one where it kind of like, from their point of view, what they would say is it radicalizes Muslims.
Yeah.
So what we can see is that America has, like you're saying, has allowed the spoiled child, to get away with whatever it does. But more recently, what they're talking about, obviously, JK talked about the status quo, but also the fact that the plan is, and we can go into this a bit more because I do want to get your thoughts on it about the two-state solution, right, and the chances of it. But what they're saying is that the official line is still two-state solution, and the issue to do with Jerusalem and to do with Masjid al-Aqsa, i.e. basically it has to stay the same. Now, people who listen to this podcast and have listened to episodes in the past, now we've spoken about the issue before about internationalization, i.e. the Americans' plans is to internationalize the holy precincts to internationalize the holy, places where there is Masjid Al-Aqsa and the wall and all these places, right, under an international force. And for them, the way they understand is that if in the future, if the Muslims come to take this back, then they're fighting not just a usurping entity, they're fighting the entire world, the international order, right? But we see that the Zionists don't want this. They are talking about sovereignty, Israeli sovereignty over here, over Masjid Al-Aqsa, over Jerusalem, Al-Quds.
Yeah.
So what we're actually saying here is the fact that the Zionists are trying to do something which actually goes against what the Americans want.
Yeah.
So even though it might be unprecedented where Americans or the British and the French and all these people are coming out and kind of like, in a soft way condemning what happened, the reality is it's not because they care, it's because this is going against their agenda. I mean, even the statements by King Abdullah II of Jordan, he talked about, we're ready and made threats. There was even a video being shared from the Jordanian parliament. I don't know if you guys saw it, where you had all these politicians and some of the stuff, if I repeat it on here, we'll probably get banned.
I was about to say, don't repeat it.
They were holding back, right? But what it seems like is these things these statements don't materialize and they remain as just statements, right? So we can see that, the Americans, they want to internationalize. They maybe want a two-state solution, but this is not what the Zionist lobby, the Zionist movement, the Zionist government, or the state of Israel want. This leads me on to the next question, and I want to get your thoughts on it about the two-state solution, because something that is kind of like confusing to me, because when Trump was promoting the deal of the century, from an American point of view, to me that seemed more realistic. He kind of moved away from the two-state solution, more to a one-state solution, right? Which is then recognized by the countries around. But now the Biden administration are talking about the two-state solution, and hence why, like you guys have mentioned, they require some land there to become a state in the future, right? Because the more that's being taken is making it more difficult, like you guys have mentioned, for the normalization process, because people are enraged thinking, the governments are talking about 1967 borders, right? Even though years ago, trust me, years ago when they talk about 1967 borders, you'd be like, no, every inch of Palestine has come back. But now the 1967 borders seems
impossible,
right? But just some quotes I want to give to you. So Netanyahu in 2019, he said, all settlements, without exception, those that are in blocks and those that aren't, need to remain under Israeli sovereignty. There's this far-right MP called Zviga Fogel. Surely you didn't pronounce his name like that. But anyway, what he said, what he supports is applying sovereignty on all the land that legally belongs to Israel. Okay. Also, Netanyahu, when they won these recent elections, he promised to annex West Bank, and what he said was that while choosing the timing and considering the national and international interests of the state of Israel. Okay. He also said the Jewish people have an exclusive and unquestionable right to all areas of the land of Israel. And also, the government will promote the development settlements in all parts of the land of Israel, in the Galilee, the Negev, the Golan, Judea, and Samaria. Obviously, they're talking about West Bank here, right? So, when we're talking about two-state solution, you can have two-state solution if there's two states, if there's a land of two states. But what are your thoughts? Because America seems like they want two-state solution, but from the actions and the statements of the Israelis, it seems like they're doing everything in their ability to stop that from happening or being an option. JK, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think from America's perspective, they want they want a diplomatic solution, really, because obviously yes, there's Jews, there's a lobby in America, but from the US, that's not the only They've got lots of things that they're the superpower. They've got other things on their mind. They've got other plans and agendas, right? The Israeli agenda is not, that's not the key thing for them. For them, it's world domination, really, right? And maintaining that world domination that they already have. So for them, they want a solution like Rash, and I think you or Rash mentioned that they want to settle this issue. They want to settle the issue, right? Because the issue itself is a live issue for years, right? They caused it, obviously, but it's an issue that enrages Muslims and it stokes the emotions of Muslims, and they want to end that, right? So they want to come to a settlement that not only they are happy with, but the Muslims are happy with. Essentially, they want the Muslims to be happy with whatever settlement there is, and I think that's where they're struggling. Obviously, the Muslims won't be happy with 1967 borders, because that's 78% of Palestine going to the Zionists. So why should we be happy with that? So I think from America's perspective, they want this. And for me, whether they call it the two-state solution or a one-state solution, it's actually the same thing, in that when Trump mentioned it, when in his deal of the century, what he was saying really is that it's a one-state solution, and the Palestinians will be there and they'll have their land, but all of their decision-making and sovereignty will not be with them, right? So the military, they won't have any military, they won't have sovereignty over some of the decisions and all of that. Hence, a one-state solution. I think now with the Biden administration, they're just changing some of the terminology, because a two-state solution makes it sound like Palestine and the Palestinian government, for example, will have sovereignty, but they won't. The reality is they won't have that. They will still be subdued, and they will still have to give up their sovereignty to the US and Israel. So it's words at the end of the day. Yeah, it might be for slight differences, but essentially they're the same thing. So going to your question about, trying to remember what you asked.
In regards to the Americans still promoting this, but the Zionists actually, the actions and
So, and I think that's the key thing. Yeah, so that was the point I was going to make. So that from a Zionist perspective and Israel's perspective, they have their own agenda, and a lot of their agenda, like I said, is from a religious perspective as well, from a theological perspective, as well as the fact that they want as much sovereignty and power as they can get, as any nation would, right? Even other nations that aren't fully agents of America will seek some sort of national interest. You look at Erdogan, for example. He looks for some of his natural interests, right? Obviously, they have to work within a certain framework, but they do their best to get what they try and get as much of the cake as they can. And that's basically the perspective of Israel. They're trying to get as much of the cake as they can, which means sovereignty and power over their land and all of that. And that's why the religious Zionists and the far right and those who are not willing to accept the two-state solution are very much saying, we want sovereignty over Jerusalem. It's our Temple Mount. Why should we give it up to the international community? So that's their perspective. Likewise, they're Muslims as well. Why should we give out? Al-Aqsa is the first Qibla of Islam. Al-Aqsa is one of the three most holiest sites of Islam. Why should we give that up to the international community? Even from a theological perspective, we won't want to give it. And then, like you said earlier, from what that means in the future, it's a massive, has massive repercussions, because that land then becomes, we try and take that land as an Islamic army in the future, for example, you're at war with the world, right? Because that's international land. So that's why I think every party has their own agenda when it comes to Israel, and America's more politics. From our perspective, we're Muslim. This is our land, even from I think you said you watched the film Farha. Yeah, you watched it. Yeah, so it's it's a anecdote of what happened in 1948, but that itself, it shows that we were just pushed out. People were literally just pushed out of that land, and their homes were stolen, and some of the people even held onto their keys. So I think that's the reason why there's differences between America and Israel. They have different agendas. Yes, they work within a similar sphere, but America has a more strategic, more global agenda, whereas Israel obviously looking out for their own selves and try and get as much of the cake as they can.
Yeah. And also we see, using Russia's example again of the spoiled child, is that there's times when the Americans have to get the spoiled child and bend them over on their lap and give them a spanking. And what we will see is that the Americans will be, through their means, all the means that they possess, they will be applying pressure on this government, whether it's the fact that all these, whether it's the Americans who kind of instructed the UAE to go to the UN and raise this issue with all these countries, the French, the British, the Americans, normally countries which don't normally say much about what the Zionists are doing. They've come out.
It's happening today, isn't it? The UN meeting with the Israelis in the UAE is happening probably as we speak.
Exactly. Okay. Exactly. So, but also there's the element of Hamas. And, Hamas have made it clear that, if these, if this new government tries to go ahead with the plans that it's been, the statements, the promises being making to its voters, then they're gonna feel the wrath of Hamas. So you can see that a lot of these things can be used to kind of bring the spoiled child back in line. And I think we're gonna see these things being used. I mean, one of the main issues I would say is for the population, the Jewish Zionist population, is that security is the main issue for them, I would say. And I think what America is going to do is trying to remind them that you might be getting a bit carried away with all this religious sentiment, but at the end of the day, your security should be number one priority. And if attacks start to happen within 1948 borders, and missiles or rockets fired towards Tel Aviv and stuff like this, then this will remind the people that don't get out of line. But in regards to we mentioned the UN and stuff. One thing I noticed is there was a statement by the Arab Parliament, and who kind of like condemned the plans and condemned the Jewish settlers going to Al-Aqsa, the increasing of Jewish settlements and stuff like this. And what they said was that this the Arab League's Parliament statement was, settlements, especially in and around the city of Jerusalem, aim to change the geographical and historical features of the city and Judaize it. And we know that the Israelis have been, for a while now, trying to Judaize the entire area, right? Also, what they said was that the Arab League also called on the international community to abandon its silence and confront these crimes, activate the mechanisms of international law and international human right law, and hold the perpetrators of these crimes accountable in order to achieve justice and fairness for the Jewish people. So the point I want to make here is the fact that when we talk about the UN and we talk about the Oslo Accords and Camp David and all this stuff, actually, if you think about it, all these resolutions have ever done is stall the Muslims from taking that land back. That's all it's done. And that's a fact. That's all it's done. And whilst this has been happening, right, in fact, the opposite has happened, is that the Zionists have taken more and more on Palestine and continue to do so. So Russia's point is so valid that when they talk about these UN resolutions, right, look what they did to Saddam Hussein, okay? But when it comes down to the Zionists, it's different. I mean, Netanyahu, what he mentioned was that the Jewish people are not occupiers in their own land, no occupiers in our eternal capital Jerusalem, and no UN resolution can distort the historical truth, right? So in regards to international law and international humanitarian law and the UN, it's a shame, and I don't think it's as popular as it was in the past, but it's a shame that there are Muslims that still look to these kind of institutions to try to find justice in regards to what's happening in Palestine, when in reality, it's these institutions that have allowed what happened in 1948 and what continues to happen to this day.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, 100%. And I think you basically hit the nail on the head in that the UN are responsible actually for a lot of the what do you call it? The infamous agreements that happened. The Balfour Declaration. The UN were part of that. The Oslo Accords, the other accords that happened. There's been involvement from them. And when it comes to UN, the UN. What's it called? The things that they've not adhered to. Resolutions. There's been no consequences of them of Israel for not aligning with that or playing ball. So how can we expect any difference from the UN? And the other thing to recognize when there's a lot of language between Israel's actions are not accepted by the international community or their borders. But one thing we need to recognize is, to an extent, yes, they're not. So, for example, from what happened from 1948 to 1967 and beyond, that's the bit that the UN say, oh, this isn't recognized. But they do accept 1948. They do accept that. And 1948 is still majority of Palestine under the Zionists. So, so as a Muslim and as an Ummah, we need to ask ourselves that, is this acceptable? Are we also, because if we're calling to the UN, that means we also align with their beliefs that Israel have some, they
have some legitimacy.
They've got legitimacy and they have a right to these lands. And that word is used a lot, this right, the Israeli right or the Palestinian right. And even when it comes to that protests with the Palestinian flag and all of this, they talk about the Palestinian right. And we need to be really careful, because what you're doing here is you're legitimizing the other party. You're legitimizing the existence of Israel. And all you're basically saying is that you can have this land, but you can't go any further. But that, as a Muslim, we shouldn't accept that, because you're essentially surrendering most of that Muslim land to the Zionists by giving legitimacy to the UN and Israel. So, it's just going to lead to more issues for the Muslim, more oppression for the Muslims. It's going to lead to us accepting the state of Israel and the UN turning around and saying, look, the Muslims accepted this. And that's why the Abraham Accords was such an issue, because the Abraham Accords made it look like that the Muslims have accepted.
Yeah.
Bahrain, UAE, who else was there? Morocco. So these nations have normalized. So what that tells the international community on the world is that, look, the Muslims have accepted it. But I think Rash made a really good point, is that when you look at the people rejected it. The World Cup, for example, you had people that are from these nations that said, no, we don't want to even speak to you. When it came to the anniversary of the normalization agreements, Abraham Accords, there's protests in Bahrain and Morocco. I don't think it's made mainstream news, but the people are protesting against these. So I think that's the good thing. Alhamdulillah, there's still goodness in the Ummah. There is obviously goodness in the Ummah, that they will reject this. The problem is the leaders, those who supposedly represent the Ummah and the people. They're the ones that have sold out, and they're the ones that are making these agreements. And that's why the people really need to rise up against these false collaborating rulers that are basically betraying the Ummah rather than really supporting and representing the Ummah.
Yeah, no, exactly. And the thing is, you mentioned the issue of right, and I think that's really important, because yes, they're trying to change the kind of status quo, if you want to call it that, at Masjid Al-Aqsa, by saying, one of the things where it's so, it makes you laugh if you watch the storming by Ben-Gvir, and the way he was coming across like he was like Nelson Mandela or something. He was saying, oh, yeah, everyone has a right here, you know what I mean? Muslims have a right here, Christians have a right here, Jews have a right here. I'm against racism, right? But what they're talking about is the fact that they want to change something which has been kind of like universally accepted, is that is a Muslim land. Not just that, it's a Muslim place of worship. So what they're talking about is trying to find this middle way where Okay.
It's an interesting strategy. Sorry to interrupt you, because this is just a point I wanted to make on this area. Is the strategy is for those people who don't understand the dynamics of the whole Palestine, Israel, and Holy Land kind of. If they don't do any reading, they're trying to the messages to those people. So whether it's to other Jews, to make Jews think that this is the case, whether it's to non-Muslims who don't know the political situation, or even Muslims who don't understand the political situation, what they're trying to say to them is, why shouldn't the Jews have a right to pray in their holiest site? So if you take that argument in isolation and you go to a Muslim, and I've heard actual Muslims say this as well before, because they're just not very clued up on what's happened there, especially the youth. And this is what has really concerned me over recent years, is you speak to youngsters, people who just come into university or college years, and they've not had the chance to really study what the situation is there, and they will say, oh, surely the Jews have a right there, the Christians have a right there, it should be international because it's the heartland of all the religions and all of this kind of stuff. So that's what they're trying to preach towards, without highlighting that the person who's saying this is the person who's talking for ethnic cleansing of Muslims in the area. And it's the people who are promoting this idea of, oh, Jews, Christians, and Muslims can all pray here, is the same people who are kicking people out of their homes and settling on their lands. So you have to be very careful, because the media shows that bit. So the Western media, okay, yes, you've had obviously the like saying that we're against this, but anybody who's not in the know can instantly go, oh, well, why shouldn't the Jews have a right to pray in their holiest site? It's very intentional, and that's my worry, because some people, Muslims or non-Muslims, or the media is pushing that kind of message. And what they need to do, whoever hears that message, needs to look a bit deeper and go, that's not what they're actually asking for. This is just a foot in the door into Al-Aqsa, as it was a foot in the door into Palestine, and now they've managed to wipe out Palestine, and they want to wipe out the Muslims in Al-Aqsa as well.
Yeah, that's a really key point, to be fair. It's dangerous, and like you said, you need to know the historical context of what these people are doing. They're not there innocently, we're just here to pray. This is an act of war, to be fair. Yeah. This is an act of war. If we... genuinely speaking, if we had an element of security and the Muslim leaders really did represent the Muslims, this would be an act of war. They'd go to war for this, right?
Absolutely.
We don't. We've got people who say one thing but do another. But the reality is, like you said, these same people, they put that one foot into your door, your actual homes, and what happened there? So what do you think they want to do when they put their foot into the mosque? 100%. Do you know what I mean? So you need to understand it. Just in isolation, just saying, they've got a right to their holy place. That I don't think it's not fair.
Sadly, some people will fall for it, and that's my concern, and that's what people need to be aware of.
No, bro. To be honest with you, that was a fantastic point, bro, by both of you. But that is because that's what came across what this guy was saying, and that made me. It reminded me. I was reading this BBC article, and obviously we know the BBC are very impartial, right? But the way they write it, when they talk about the Temple Mount of Masjid Al-Aqsa, Al-Haram Al-Sharif, right? They'll say this is how it's written.
Contested.
No, not even. No.
Oh no. Okay.
But just think about it now. With what you said, Rash, and just think about what I'm going to say now. What they will say is, this is the most holiest place for the Jews, and the third most holiest place for Muslims.
Yes, I heard that loads of times. And it's very intentional. Several of the media platforms said that across Europe. Even Middle Eastern, some of the Middle Eastern stations said that as well. They were like the first holiest site of the Jews and the third holiest site for Muslims. It's like an undertone of a message there.
100%. And the way JK said it was the right way, by saying that it's one of the three places, holiest places. It's not like, so like you're saying, someone might say, well, if it's their number one place and it's our third place, right, then surely they got more right to it. But the issue to the right is important, because even if then people, and it's really good that you say that, Rash, because if people are thinking like you're saying, when there's going to be solutions offered, like, okay, let's have a certain hour time for the Muslims and a certain time for the Jewish settlers or the worshippers. Then they will say, okay, if they're coming onto the Temple Mount or coming onto the Haram Al-Sharif, right, and they need to pray, then it's a bit bad, isn't it, that they can stand in the courtyard? Why don't we just, make a bit of that area and make a synagogue there?
Exactly.
You understand?
And they've set a precedent by doing what they've done in Palestine. So why would you trust them with anything else?
And the way you said it, bro, is bang on. That you know what I mean.
You're going to make a clip. You're going to make a clip. You're going to make a clip out of that, aren't you?
This is going to be the same way that you let them in. You gave them the garden, right? And now you're not even living in the city. You understand? And that's the reality of it. But okay, guys, a couple of more things I want to quickly ask, and we'll bring the podcast to a close, right? Get your thoughts on this. Really, is like, we spoke about the extreme elements and the right wing and stuff like that, and we spoke about people like, or we referred to people like Yair Lapid and the left and the people towards the center. Now, something I was thinking about, I want to get your thoughts. With these kind of like hardcore religious Zionist right wingers in government, right, and people who seem like they're gonna do what they've said. Do you think actually this is better for the revival of the Ummah, or better for the Ummah in the sense that, yes, in the short term, it seems like these guys, like JK mentioned at the beginning, these guys are going to persecute the Muslims, certainly in Palestine, more probably openly than the guys previously have done, right? Even though that would be really difficult, because these guys are on a next level when it comes down to persecuting Muslims. Just look at Jenin and all these places, right? But do you think that there is a case that the more extreme they are in what they say and what they do, then this is actually going to get Muslims to a stage where they think now something needs to happen. Something really needs to happen, right? And you can probably see why the Americans want to kind of like pull them back a bit as well, because they don't want that reaction from the Muslims, right? Even though the scary bit is, and Arash, you mentioned a bit of it at the beginning during the podcast, the scary bit of it is like where the Ummah is right now. I don't know what it would take for the Muslims to take that next step. I honestly don't, and I don't, because it's like what they've done so far should have been
enough. It should have been enough.
So I don't know, but however, do you think that these more extreme elements are good for the revival and the overall situation of the Ummah, even though in the short term, obviously, things will get more difficult for the people living there?
So I find this question quite a difficult one to answer, because we don't live there. Yeah, so I don't face that persecution. I haven't lost my home. So it's a difficult one to just blanket answer. I kind of understand where we're going, and I'll give my opinion on it. But just to caveat it, look, I don't live there. I'm living here comfortably in my house. I haven't had to been persecuted by the Zionists day in, day out, not knowing when your home is going to be next. When you've already been moved out of your main home, they settle even further because they just want all of the land. I'm not experiencing that, and I feel the pain of that, because nearly every year, nearly every Ramadan, we'll see what happens this Ramadan. Allah protect them, but every Ramadan you see this happen, right? And it's heartbreaking seeing those scenes. So I can't really answer it from I'm there and I know. I don't, right? I haven't suffered that. But what I can say is that, yes, you're probably right, that it does have a reaction when the enemy is more blatant and just forthright about what their intentions are, rather than someone who's snaky and trying to be diplomatic, but in reality they want the same solution. You're probably right. It does have a greater reaction to not just the Palestinians, but the Ummah in its entirety, because obviously this is an issue that impacts the entire Ummah. But I think, like an example was, if you remember last time, I don't know whether it was a couple of Ramadans ago, at when they stormed the Masjid Al-Aqsa. Maj, you still there? I don't know. You've frozen on me. I don't know.
No, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear.
You frozen on me. If you remember what happened with obviously there was a resistance, right? the people stood up. And what can you remember that incident where one of the imams started talking about the Fatah, and they started kind of supporting the government and all of that, and they didn't really talk about the issue that was at hand, which was the fact that Gaza was being bombarded, and the people themselves started calling out the imam. And okay, from a fiqh perspective, someone might say, okay, Juma, you shouldn't be doing this. Fine, I'm not talking about it from that angle, but it was quite refreshing because it showed that the people were angered and they were now ready to question those who were not on their side, right? And those who were kind of giving their side of the authority. And obviously Fatah got quite a lot of stick, and Hamas got a lot of prominence, especially the armed resistance movement, that arm of it. So that is a real clear example of where something like this has to happen for people to really react in the right way because of the anger. So I totally understand that it probably does have a positive impact, but what I can't say is, does that positive outweigh the negative? I don't know, because I don't really want to see my brothers and sisters harmed and oppressed, really. And I don't think it's fair for me to sit here and be like, yeah, it's good. And not really. How do I know? You know, that's not, you know, what if I was going through that situation? I might just want some normalcy and the fact that I just want to live a normalish life, as normal as it can be. So it's really easy just living here and saying, I don't know what you think, Rash, but
I think I see where you're coming from. I think you need to almost take that element out of it. You need to take a step back and you need to go, you know what? And anybody who listens to these podcasts will know that I mention this quite regularly. When the clash is blatant, you know, when the clash between Haqq and Batil is there and is a blatant in your face, then it's more likely to wake people up than to, you know, for it to be, like you say, underground and softly, and then you lose a generation or you lose multiple generations because people don't realize. As an example, what we're seeing now is far more people are waking up and going, we need to protect our children from atheism and LGBT and all of these things because it's blatant. But that stuff has been there for decades. It's not that atheist just popped out of the, you know, of some random place in the last couple of years, or LGBT and homosexuality and all of these things didn't exist many years ago. They did. It's just that it's more blatant now. So when we say that, is it good? We're not saying it's good because we want it. And we would never want harm on ourselves or our brothers and our sisters. We're just reflecting on the situation. You know, at the end of the day, Allah is the best of planners. Sometimes it takes, you saw historically, things had to get really bad before people stood up and a revolution occurred. And sadly, it might take that. So in that respect, I agree with Majid's question in that it's a very pertinent question, because it's saying sometimes you do need it to get to that serious point for people to wake up and go, you know what, we need to do something. And that's not because we want that on them. We don't. We want peace and harmony. We want our brothers not to have to go and fight like that. We want our sisters not to be scared in their homes. But unfortunately, the situation doesn't allow us to choose. So better that we actually open to what needs to be done than just lose another generation or two.
Yeah, no, I agree. I definitely agree with that sentiment. I think the key thing is, though, that when things like this do happen, that the reaction isn't just emotional. And it's not just like we're going to vent our anger, and it just becomes that rather than actually looking at the real solution. Because that can often happen where you get so subdued into the actual situation of what's happening. You've been bombarded, and there's this kind of emotional reaction to, obviously, I'm not having a go at that. That might be the natural reaction. If your house is burning, you are going to react in a certain way that may not be, if you had the time and effort to think about things, you're just going to try and get to the immediate solution. Do you know what I mean? Or trying to immediately get out of the danger. So I think you're absolutely right. If it takes events like this to really wake up the Ummah, then in the grand scheme of things, taking emotion out is better. But we just need to make sure that, like you said, it's not like the first time this has happened. This has happened many times. Several intifadas. There's been things like this happening. What will it really take? So that's the key thing that's not me putting the question to Ummah, it's all of us really. What can we do really to make sure that we do what the Messenger ﷺ would have done and really think about the Islamic
but that's the beauty of, you know, I know we don't know Allah's plan because that's within his realm of knowledge, but the Jews and the Zionists pushing for, you know, taking Al-Aqsa, yes, Madge is right. What will it take to really awaken, the Muslims to do something physical? But for them to go and say, we want that and we want to build our temple, that's a big step. And that actually may lead to the Muslims actually doing something. You never know.
100%.
I mean,
Something that actually changes something as well.
Yeah, exactly.
The fact that the sole super of the world does not want this to happen is because they understand that there are some red lines.
Yes.
Even these treacherous rulers
Very good point.
can't hide behind. You understand? But guys, one last question, inshallah ta'ala, I was thinking about, get your quick thoughts on it, is, from what we can see is that obviously these elections happen and these far right extremists, the most extreme government in Israeli history has come to power. This also then kind of gives us an insight on the mood within the Israeli population. And also what we're seeing is the fact that look at what's happening in India. Just look what's happening in other places where you have far right elements coming into power, and you have some far right elements coming into power, and their main card is against Muslims and Islam. And in their countries, they don't even have like 1% of Muslims in their countries, but it's just something that's become the card to use to come into power. But it is showing, certainly in occupied Palestine, that the people there on the ground, they are happy with what their governments do. Not everyone, right? But you got a big population, big part of it, who understand, who know what these people are about. They know their statements. They know what's going to happen. Maybe they've also fallen into this illusion that they are this powerful being that's kind of like indestructible. You know what I mean, right?
Well, the Hindutva one in particular is interesting because that has even crossed borders, and you saw it from, all the right things that happened in Leicester. The fact that none of the Hindu institutions in the UK came out and openly spoke out against Hindutva highlights it itself, doesn't it? Because so whether they liked the fact that these things were happening over here or not, they didn't, obviously, some of them, but they still didn't come out. And in the same way as they forced Muslims to speak out against ISIS, they didn't get, there wasn't any Hindu temples or institutions who came out and openly spoke out against the Hindutva movement. So it just goes to prove that they've been so successful in their demonization of Muslims that it's crossed borders into other lands, and lands where actually, to an extent, Muslims and Hindus were living in relative peace together.
Yeah, no, exactly. And, it was just something I wanted to kind of get in, because what it does show that the fact that, here, it's not like, as an example, it's not like in the Muslim lands where you have the governments going through with this normalization and Abraham Accords. However, they don't represent the people. But here you got the masses who actually are pushing ahead with this. So it just goes to show the fact that maybe, they themselves are signing their death certificate, if I can say it that way, and I don't mean in any violent way, as a yeah, just in case that's snipped out and big thing, you see me on Sky News or something. But listen, guys, inshallah, there's still loads to talk about, but we'll kind of like bring things to a close. But as normal, as usual, I will get your final thoughts and maybe your advice for the Ummah, because one thing we don't want to do is, yes, there's definitely value in generating awareness on what's happening, but I think there should maybe be some kind of a message on maybe something practical we can do, or maybe some words of motivation we need to make this something an issue that we take seriously. But JK, inshallah, I'll start off with you, bro. Your final thoughts?
Yeah, I think with the reality of what, like you just said in this point earlier, around this far right movement is becoming more of a reality, and it's, like I said, it's not just a government, but the people's sentiment is moving that way as well. It should be a warning to us, really, that look, this is getting closer and closer. And we really need to think about what the answer is that will solve not just Palestine, but the problems of the Ummah at large. And my message really is probably an obvious one, but I'll say it anyway, is that we need to really take the reference point to be Islam when it comes to these issues. Like, it's very easy with Palestine, especially. It's become one of those causes that everyone's talking about. It is good in a way. There's awareness raised. People will raise the flag, even non-Muslims and football fans and stuff will raise the flag, and it's one of those kind of struggles that people know about. But I think we as Muslims really need to take the Islamic angle for everything, but this especially, and understand what is the Hukum Shari around some of this situation. Why is Al-Aqsa so important to what is the history of Al-Aqsa? Understand that, increase our knowledge on that from an Islamic perspective, not just from a oppression perspective, from a why do we as Muslims have we that is part of our land. It's very similar to the Kaaba, right? We would never give the Kaaba to anyone or internationalize the Kaaba. So why don't we treat Al-Aqsa, view Al-Aqsa the same way? And if you don't, we should be asking ourselves, because the main thing is we're Muslims. We believe in Allah. We follow the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Allah has given us certain rights and given us certain lands and made things superior to the Muslims above others, right? And we need to take that perspective. Otherwise, what will happen is we will really water down that solution, make it about persecution, make it about, everyone gets a part of it, let everyone pray there and all of that. And what will happen is we will accept a solution that is not from Islam. We'll end up accepting a solution that doesn't abide by the Sharia. So my advice really is that look into the history of it, look into the fiqh of it, the Sharia behind this land, and what the actual solution is to really liberate the land entirely from the occupation.
Jazakallah, bro. Really good advice there. Rush?
Yeah, I haven't got really too much more to add, other than just to say that some of the opinion of people can be quite fatalistic on this one. I have heard people start saying things like, "Oh, just wait for Imam Mahdi. He's going to come, and then the armies will liberate," and all of those things. But what I would try to say to people who have kind of become fatalistic about the whole situation is, look, the dynamics of world politics is changing. You're seeing yes, America are still the superpowers, but you're seeing them having to focus on the likes of China and Russia and people like that now. You're seeing, people, many of these right-wing populist movements that start, and then you see people embrace Islam off the back of it. I was watching that Joran van Klaveren's interview, a couple of them that he did, and amazing. People hate Islam one minute, and next minute they absolutely love it. And next minute they want to do something to progress it. So Allah's on our side, and even the people who hate it the most, if they can become Muslim and then working towards a solution for Muslims or progressing Islam, then that means there's always hope. So we shouldn't lose that hope. And having that fatalistic view of just waiting for Imam Mahdi is an element of losing hope in yourself. You're saying that I can't do anything, someone else is going to come along and sort it. And with that will be the fact that you won't do any action. So I second what JK is saying about go out and study, but I also further say that we need to be involved as an ummah, as individuals, as a collective, to go, you know what, the only way is for Islamic armies to go in and liberate those lands, but we need to put steps in place to get to that, even if it just means sitting down with brothers and sisters and making them aware of that solution and we all be on a common page. Many more people are now talking about that we need a khilafah, we need Islamic unity, we need a single ruler, we need to remove these rulers from the lands who are just puppets of the West. So many more people are talking about that, and it just needs to be common discussion enough that people actually go out and act. And then I think with Allah on our sides and with victory promised, then inshallah either we will see it or future generations will see it, but we need to be involved in that struggle.
Yeah, no, Jazakallah, bro. Really good piece of advice there. And one thing just to kind of add to that from myself would be that the Messenger sallallahu he said that never belittle any small action. And when it comes to the issue of Al-Aqsa, and Palestine, just making sure that the people around you, the Muslims around you, your children, the next generation know the reality of that place, know what it means to Muslims, know what the actual solution is something which in itself is working towards, resuming the Islamic way of life, but also liberating these lands. So people shouldn't just think, well, I can't go and then stop these people from doing what they're doing. You got to think about what's in your capability, and you start somewhere, and inshallah ta'ala, it will have that ripple effect, and we will see, that land cleansed of the Zionist curse, or shall I say, the Zionist virus that currently resides there. But inshallah, guys, jazakallah khair. Really enjoyed this episode. Really good points. And I'm sure the people watching this and listening to this have also found it beneficial. And listeners, watchers, if you have, then please don't forget to share this with your family and friends. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please leave a comment in the comments field. Let us know what you think. Anything you want to add, something maybe we got wrong, please feel free. Interact, and inshallah ta'ala, we're always striving to improve, inshallah. So guys, once again, jazakallah khair for this episode, and inshallah ta'ala, see you on the next one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.